our app idea, so that was awesome. All right, so we tried to get a wide range of mentors. A lot of the people on the panel tonight are mentors from our cohorts. So they have a lot of different experience, and we hope that that will give us a lot of great perspectives. So first of all, I guess I would like to know what are the main characteristics you're looking for in a candidate in a UX interview? Who wants to come off mute and take that one first?
Okay, so I'll go. I probably like for them to be really detail oriented, have communication skills. Oh, well, actually know how to read the audience, right? Because sometimes in UX, when we actually do the research and we have to do the presentation, we have to know who we're presenting to, right? So if we're presenting to ourselves, we're all about methodology. But if you're presenting to C-suites and others, you have to know how to engage them in order to get your point across. So detail oriented, really know how to do the long spiel of things, and also elevator pitches when it comes to results, right? And just somebody that can cross collaborate. In our field, we have to work with the developers, the stakeholders, and everybody in between, right? Project managers. So it's really important for them to be able to cross collaborate with everybody.
I'll chime in, so Ravi, that we're going to hear lots of really good answers to this because we're looking for well-rounded people. So I'll just chime in with one aspect that I'm looking for is someone who's resilient and kind of open-minded and doesn't have like a fixed mindset. Because when they join our company or any company, they're going to have to adapt to the problems we're trying to solve and probably learn new things in order to solve those problems. So definitely looking for that kind of a mindset, not necessarily someone who's already a proven fantastic designer, but someone who can prove to me that they can solve new problems.
I'll add that too. Kind of different flavors of what Gianna and Ravi mentioned. I'm looking for primarily two things. Someone who's a great storyteller, someone who can make a compelling case for empathizing with the customer in front of our stakeholders and the reason why we would make certain recommendations or kind of the reason why we would make decisions behind the design. I think is really important for any of the levels of organizations I've been at. And then someone who is a thought leader. They can bring different ideas or solutions to the table and also kind of drive change in our organization, really make people think a different way about things, and help us kind of stay fresh and on top of different ideas or trends.
So we have a big interview process, and so what we look for in an interview, there's some assumptions that are made for the candidate to be at the stage of having an interview, which was that we screened the candidate, looked at probably their portfolio, their resume, at least had a general sense of who the candidate was before they got in. And then once getting in, it's a lot of just understanding of who the person is. How do they get into UX? What are they thinking about doing? Do they seem like that they'll be a culture fit? Sometimes we see just from the portfolio, if the skills are there, that's, something that can be learned, through school. But like Ravi was saying, like the communication skills or the storytelling skills, those are, once you get to the interview, those are what's important.
And that's a good segue, Gibson. I think for people who are new to UX, probably just the process of a UX interview and how many rounds there are and who you're interviewing with at what point may be new. So would you guys be able to just explain kind of the chronological progression of an interview process at your company? Jamie?
Oh, I can go, but Gibson kind of already alluded to it. I work with Gibson. But our interview process is pretty long. So like he said, we'll look at the portfolio as well as the resume to provide the start of the interview. The first interview is just, a brief 30-minute interview with HR. Then there's a skills assessment, like panel test, where we're essentially just seeing if you're a good fit for the team, and just asking a lot of behavioral questions. And then there is a design interview where we give you a prompt, and give you a couple days to work on it, and then you present it to us. And then sometimes you even, after presenting to a couple of managers, you may present to their managers. And then the last round is actually an interview with our owner of the company, because he loves to meet everyone that works with the company, which we love about our culture there. So it is a pretty extensive process, but it at least makes us confident that when we get through the end, that we're picking the right person that's the right fit for our team.
I can talk a little bit about the process that I've seen. My last company, which was AIG, was a big corporate, and then what we experienced at a startup. Usually the first barrier to entry to get like a phone screen is you have to present a portfolio and resume. If we feel like you have like good case studies on a portfolio to kind of demonstrate like the level of, that matches the role we're looking for, we do a recruiter screen. They kind of ask basic questions to make sure that you just fit the right level of role that we're looking for. Then it's a hiring manager interview first. So it's usually with me. And second would be a team panel interview, kind of very similar to what was just mentioned, for a culture fit. And depending on the level of the role, like if it's a lead or a director role, something higher, it's a C-suite member interview after that.
Jamie, what about at HCSS?
So our process is definitely very structured, and as Allison said, many steps. But I've also worked for places that have had no process, or have kind of just been ad hoc whenever they do decide. And so I wish I could see people in the audience, but I'm kind of curious if people that are here have had the first experience where they have had 5-6 rounds of interviews that are kind of structured, or has it been a little bit more ad hoc? Maybe we can help answer those kind of questions.
Yeah, feel free to put your answers in the chat, and we can kind of take the temperature of the audience that way.
Mm-hmm. It was a little bit less formal, right? Well, you had to have a portfolio to apply. I talked to who is my manager. I went in for an interview, but of course I was interviewed by the whole team. And then we went to eat because we actually all, before the pandemic, we all hang out even outside of work, right? We try in our team building exercises. A lot of my team members are from Brazil, so they do a lot of cookouts and things that we used to do with each other. And we literally went to lunch every day with each other. So he was very adamant about us being able to get along almost like family. And then, okay, let's talk about your skill set as well, right? So it was very important for cultural fit, or just fit of the team, period. And he asked the team, like even when we interview people after I got hired on, it's like, hey, do you like this person? Do you think that this person will be a good fit with us all? Because we kind of are like a little family away from our families in that sense, right?
I could talk about our process at Pro. Usually it goes through submit an application, cover letter, resume, portfolio, and that gets scrutinized in detail. And for those that make it through that process, 30-minute phone screen. Oh, this is also pre-pandemic, just to qualifying that. But a 30-minute phone screen, 5 questions. And after that, then we have a interview day. And that day is usually comprised of 4 to 5 people, 60-minute interviews, all the same questions, 10 questions. And at the end of the day, we conclude with a situational problem, which is kind of unusual probably compared to some other places, is we don't ask you to design anything. And a lot of that is because we really look at your portfolio in a lot of detail. And if your portfolio is pretty good, you probably can design. And the big question that we kind of tap into is, can you work with people? Can you work with tough people? Can you deal with disappointment? Have you learned a complicated thing? Because you're probably going to do that again. And that is the kind of more nebulous thing that we want to tap into in our questions and our process that really is part of the materials that we ask of you. And the designing part of it really is kind of reflected in maybe the work you've already done and already shown us.
So I'll chime in with our process at HCSS. When I started the company, it was a company of 50 people. We've grown to over 300 now, and our interview process is still the same. If anything, it's gotten more extensive. And it's always intimidating because before we even look at your resume or portfolios, everyone who goes into the company has to take a math logic test to gauge your problem solving skills. And you have to reach a certain score before we can move on to resume review. And then once you pass that, then we can review your resume and portfolio and gauge it from there. If you pass that, then you'll go through a phone screening with our talent acquisition team and HR to gauge your culture fit. That's one of the #1 key elements to get into the company, is making sure you fit in the culture. And everyone I've worked with at the company is amazing to work with. So once you get past the phone screening, then you come in for a face-to-face interview with the hiring manager, as well as a panel of your teammates, your potential teammates, including myself. And when you come in, you'd actually have to take a second test to validate your logic test, because believe it or not, we've had people who cheated by doing their online test. So that's how we kind of gauge the verification. Once you pass the verification, then you can go through the manager interview as well as the peer interviews. Everyone usually has to be a strong yes for you to move forward. If there's any hesitation or a strong no, then you're done from there. But once you pass, you move on to the last round, which would be the executive interviews, and that'll be with the whole executive team. Because like I said, culture fit is a huge thing. Even if you bring a lot of skill sets to the role, being able to communicate well and get along with everyone is extremely important. Even though we're no longer a small company of 50 people, they still try to maintain as much as they can a very family-oriented type of environment, and they want to make sure that the executives are comfortable with the applicant, as well as the candidate feeling more comfortable with the executive team and of any level, and being able to treat everyone as equal and boost that communication skill.
Nice. Nikki posted a question in the chat. Does the formality and number of interview rounds kind of coincide with the size of the company? And from what you all have said, it sounds like it just differs by company culture. So I'm curious to know how interviews differ for designers versus researchers. I know not every company has dedicated research roles, but for those of you who do, what characteristics are you looking for in designers versus researchers, I guess, outside of just the job description differences, obviously?
Hey, I was first going to comment on some of this chat. I think Melanie is accurate. Like for us, whenever if we're going through hiring somebody full time, they are going through a lot more interviews than if we were hiring somebody contract. And I think what the other panelists are saying, if you're having an interview that's a behavior interview and they want to see if you're a culture fit, it's a two-way street. You're learning that culture is important to that company, or else they wouldn't be asking you these questions. If your interview process is, you know, 1 round, 2 rounds, and they're just like, sure, whatever, you'll probably learn that about the company too. Whenever you get in there and start working, that they have that kind of thought process for everything. So I think, you know, and what Evan's saying, the amount of, you know, what they want to learn from you is how are you going to work together in the long run? And so that's really important in the full-time interview. And Meredith, for the question on how is it different from a researcher versus a designer, for our role, we don't have separate roles, and generally we think of UXers as unicorns. Whenever they come in, it's just kind of like, you know, how many of these UX hats do you wear? And then we can kind of figure out from there, you know, if you're a good fit for the team based on what we have currently. So not a great answer, but.
So we definitely do have, you know, several different types of roles on the team that are, you know, well defined. There's a bit of overlap. I mean, there's a lot of overlap between UX and UI designers. There's a lot of UX designers who do research. So I guess the first thing I'd say is there's some professional qualities that I look for that really don't have to do with your role, that will largely determine whether you'll be successful on the team. And then we dive into specifics to the role, you know. So for UX researcher, I'm looking for, I guess, a lot of diversity in their research background and their rigor and their intellectual honesty and their ability to understand business problems and understand when to dial up or dial down the academic aspects of research. But they also have to have the same qualities that we talked about earlier, like around resilience and open kind of thought processes. I think I have a lot of evidence of that on my research team, without calling anyone out who's on the panel right now. So those are, yeah, I think you do have to get into the role, but there's just certain professional qualities, I think, for anyone who's interviewing, you've got to exhibit, otherwise you're not going to get your foot in the door. You could be, I mean, amazing at your job, but not a really good working professional that people want to work with, and that can undermine your actual abilities.
Yeah, I second what he said about like just having like general professional qualities that kind of make sure that you can kind of make it in your job in general. In my current role, the way we hire is we try to hire unicorns, like what Gibson mentioned, but I've been a hiring manager at an organization where we had researchers and designers split. For researchers, what I primarily looked for was the way that they presented quantitative and qualitative data and then made recommendations out of it. And that kind of started with from like just evaluating case studies in their portfolio to how they went about telling that story in the interview. And then something else I also looked at, it seems like it's small, but it was important to me, is the questions they're asking me at the end of the interview as a researcher is really, like, I kind of scrutinize it just a little bit more for researchers, because I want to see kind of how their brain works and how they're kind of like parsing information in a conversation. For a UI designer, in my past role, I was hiring for like senior designers. So I was looking for senior UI people that had experience with design systems, maybe contributing to a style guide or pattern library. They definitely had to have like a specific eye and have a lot of graphic work in their portfolio, and ideally share some growth and or learning in interaction design, doing micro interactions, animation, things like that, because that was something that's very specific we were looking for in that company. But yeah, I would say those were kind of like the two distinguishing things I would look at.
Some questions in the chat here. what are some examples of questions candidates ask you that are impressive to you, I guess?
I recently hired a senior designer in my company, and at the end of the interview, she asked questions about the different personas we had, and she even kind of put together in her head, just from looking at our website and stuff, what she observed as different personas. So I thought that was a great question, that as a, like, for a UX researcher, that kind of showed me a little bit about how she thought around things. I also like questions about goals, since I'm looking for that kind of thought leader person or someone who's pretty proactive. I love it when people ask me, like, what are you looking for in this role? If I started, 30 days in, 60 days in, 90 days in. Yeah, those are just some examples from the top of my head.
Outside of examples of questions you've been asked, without calling out names, because I know some of us do all work together, but can you give a tangible example of something that has really impressed you in an interview, whether it's a quality that someone exhibited, but a tangible example of how they exhibited that quality, I guess? I know Gibson, one of our teammates, was really impressive to me in his interview process. Of course, this was pre-pandemic as well, but we gave him a design challenge for Home Depot stores, and he went to the store and talked to associates and kind of secret shopped a little bit with associates to help solve the problem. And that no one had done that before in the interview process. So I was so impressed by the effort he took to really put himself in both the customer and the associates perspective. Any tangible examples you can give that would help people understand the qualities that you're looking for?
So I think I have a good one. So one of the candidates who we did end up hiring, I had a design challenge for him, a whiteboard exercise, which is really, it's intimidating at first when you just put someone on the spot and give them a challenge and just kind of whiteboard it out. But the whole purpose of it is to understand your thought process. I give you this mundane problem to solve, and I want to see how you approach it. And it tells a lot about the candidate. Do they start drawing right away? Do they ask more clarification? And where do they go from here? And this candidate was really impressive because he wasn't so focused about creating the perfect solution to this hypothetical problem. He explained his thought process very well going through it, was very inquisitive, asked a lot of questions, and at the end of it all, he's like, this is what I would do with it, but this doesn't mean this is the right answer because I'm not the user. I would want to ask the user and make sure this is exactly what they would be looking for. And he went on for a little bit about why that would be important over his proposed solution. And that was he was the only candidate out of everyone I interviewed who provided an answer like that. Everyone else was generally trying to provide this perfect drawing or wireframe on the board and explain why this is perfect.
I think it's really important to know your audience, and us, if we are interviewing and I am the user, you're creating an experience that I would like. And so doing a little bit of background either about the company or about me or the people that you're interviewing with, I think is important. I'll reverse your question, Meredith, and say the qualities that have kind of turned us away is when people, clearly they're asking us basic questions about the company that we think probably should have been figured out before they got to the interview. Or they're asking a question that we clearly talked about already. And so we don't know if it's a standard question that they're asking or they didn't understand. And another example of knowing your audience, and I've done this before, whenever I interview at places, I will ask kind of what's the formality of dress code. And at our current office, it's very, very casual. So we have had candidates come in suits, and that is one way to stick out in our office and say, you are not from here, what are you trying to sell? And they'll say, no, I'm just interviewing. It's like, okay, well, you don't need to wear a suit. Nobody will wear a suit, but some places I know that you do. And so I understand, I was taught that in college, but you always wear a suit to an interview. But know your audience, because every company is going to be a little bit different. And I think good questions to ask during the interview. If you're meeting with somebody next, you know, who am I meeting with next? You know, what's important to them, so you can start doing your homework. So whenever you go to the next interview, you're ready to crush it.
I tend to agree with Gibson that there's kind of a balance between being prepared, which is super important. The more you're prepared, the more it impresses us. You know, you're on time, you've studied the company, you've come up with questions in advance. At the end of the interview, I always give an interviewee some time to ask me questions, and that's the opportunity for them to impress me that they had interesting questions, that they maybe have more questions than we have time to ask. I always like that, to be honest. But if there's a defensive strategy too, is don't hurt yourself along the way with the interview, dressing inappropriately, showing up late, asking questions that you should know the answer to, focusing on compensation a long time. So it's just definitely this balance between just having an okay interview, impressing here and there, and not hurting yourself.
Allison, you came off mute a couple of times. Did you have an example you wanted to add?
I was just kind of going off what Gibson was saying about looking at the site and understanding the company that you're interviewing with. One of the things that impressed me about one of my most recent hires actually was two questions that she asked at the end. The first one was, one of our main core values that we live by as a company is evolve continuously. And so she said, you know, what does that mean to you, evolve continuously? I see that that's a core value. And I thought that that was a really good way to showcase that she had really looked at the company and understood that that was a value. And it also allowed me to kind of pitch the company up, because I believe that that's a big strength of the company I work for. And then the other thing was she had actually prepared, outside of even the design challenge, just ideas of things that we could potentially work on. And you don't want to go too far with that, but I did think that it showed how prepared she was and how much she wanted the job, which was pretty impressive to me.
That's always kind of a tricky balance there, of you want to show that you're taking initiative and you're thinking through the business challenges, but then how do you also protect yourself from giving a company a solution that they could, you know, take and run with? How do you guys feel about that? What level of forethought, I guess, you expect from a candidate when proposing suggestions?
It is not okay to do free work for a company. If use your smell test. If the problem seems really, really close or connected to the company, and it takes days of your time, and there's no other expectation that they're going to compensate you or pay for this or any way. If it seems like a lot of work and it seems really connected to the company's business, that's a sign. Like that's not okay. You know, we've talked internally off and on about design challenges and problems. And one of the things that's come up for us is people are busy. People have families. They already have a job in some cases. And challenges and problems that you kind of throw up and put out there that take a lot of energy and time. One, you tread into the unethical realm if it's something that they're going to use, but also it is this huge barrier for people who may be quite good and excellent. And we try to compact it in such a manner that we really rely on that portfolio as a true demonstration of your design skill, as a respect of your time. And then when you're with us for the day, it's about those interpersonal skills. It's about your behavioral skills in the past that you dealt with problems, because we've already gained confidence in your abilities. And I think that's something that you should definitely pick up on this doesn't seem right. This seems like a lot of work. It seems like something they would use.
Mhm.
Maybe you should ask and inquire or trust your instincts.
Yeah, I actually know of one person, and she was actually here, that had this situation where her homework was before the interview was come up with a research plan for their website with a budget, with a research budget, timeline, tell us all the resources that you would use, and then present it to us. And it's, she was put in a corner because she's new. She was trying to look for a job. She's for her first time. And she did it. And actually, I helped her with it because that was the only opportunity she had at the moment. And she didn't get the job, but who knows what they did with that plan. It was a solid plan.
That is a really challenging position to be put in when you were trying really hard to break into the market, especially. Melanie put a question in the chat. What's the average time between a position opening up and accepting resumes and final interviews? And I want to kind of weave that into one of the questions I had prepared here of how COVID has influenced the interview process. We don't have to go into how it's influenced the job market, but how has it influenced your interview process, and has COVID changed the timeline of these different rounds of the interview process?
I think with anything, you're gonna have some red tape, and it may not be all at your control, right? How the talent team is looking through the resumes and things like that. We've put some design recs up, and we've got interior decorators to apply. There's been like some crazy things happening, but our team, we had a couple of people on the team that weren't in Houston anyway, and so they were all remote. So that's what we kind of rolled into that as far as the pandemic is concerned. We didn't have too many problems with it. Just today at work, we hired on somebody new, and we had a 30-minute kind of intro with him. We also have team happy hours through Zoom, so we kind of like rolled him into that, and we were all just talking to him about what our roles were on the team, and what we did. And he was saying that he really appreciated, because he isn't able to meet. We aren't able to meet in person, right? So there is some red tape stuff as far as like the timeline, but I feel like in this virtual world we've been forced into, it's a little bit quicker for some reason, as far as putting the rec up, getting the responses, weeding out the interior decorators for the visual design rec, and moving forward with the team interview process, right?
Yeah, I agree with some of the things that Kiana mentioned. So for us, it's about 3 to 4 weeks until we usually fill a role, like from the moment like they apply to the moment we make an offer. It depends on like the volume of roles we're trying to fill, because our talent recruiters, like Kiana mentioned, there are kind of other things that they're dealing with. Right now, I'm trying to hire 12 roles in both the US and Mexico, and some of them are non-tech. Like I know I'm gonna fill like some business analyst roles faster than I will my UX UI ones. So it kind of depends on that too. But yeah, I would second all the things that Gianna said of that. And I do think it's much easier or much faster, I would say, to do like the Zoom calls. For some reason, it feels like lower commitment as a hiring manager for me to do like screenings and stuff over Zoom. So I'm more willing to like give people a shot and have certain conversations when I have tiebreakers with other managers. Yeah, just kind of, it feels like I can pack more interviews in a day, kind of because of the Zoom situation. Yeah.
Anybody else has COVID or I guess remote interviews? Have they changed how you evaluate a candidate? Has it changed anything about the qualities that you look for or the way that you assess those qualities?
We haven't done a lot of interviewing during the pandemic, but we have onboarded a couple people remotely during this time. And I think that's something for us to consider. Like we had 2 remote interns this summer, and then we had someone else join the team who we've never actually met in the office, you know. And sometimes they're in Houston and sometimes they're not in Houston. We have a few people like that in the team. We're moving around. So I think going into our next reviews, it's something that we'll consider, like how do we assess their ability to work remotely with us? But it's definitely new territory for us. I mean, we do a lot of phone screens and we have done plenty of interviews with video conference, and we're on that all the time so they're comfortable.
I was actually thinking about this topic today with some other coworkers about like how we're evaluating people over Zoom, because we have a mixture of people in office and remote, and there are a couple of things that I'm kind of forgiving in if I have to, if like sound cuts out and you kind of have to repeat yourself, or if they just kind of didn't hear things clearly, like kind of give some grace here and there. But definitely the way that they communicate and like how engaging they are on the video is something that kind of weigh a little bit more heavily, because you want to feel like they're just as personable as like you are in the office, and that you're comfortable enough to ask questions of each other and have like a good rapport in working together. So it's kind of like a test drive in like how you would work remotely.
Through some of our remote interviews, it's been apparent when the interviewee is feeling rushed to get in and out of the interview, like they're on their lunch break, versus those, if you think about before this, when we would maybe take the morning off or the whole day off for an interview, and you would come a little bit more collected and treat it like a big day. I know we've had a couple where like one of the candidates was in their phone during lunch, and it was fine for us, but the candidate was very distracted. And others where they just seemed like that they were very caught up in their current job, and so they weren't present enough for that first meeting. And I think it's just kind of a learning opportunity, especially something that we've learned is that not everybody's comfortable with video chat. Like we video conference all the time at work, and so we're comfortable with it. But whenever we're asking people inside of their homes, they might not be as comfortable. So I think it's something that we've had to learn is, you know, offer some grace in those situations while being remote. I'm kind of curious. I heard it like it's awesome, Luana, that y'all are hiring like crazy. And Robbie, it sounds like y'all are kind of a little bit slower maybe now than you were last year. And I think that that's also a little bit true with us. Like luckily we've been able to hire quite a few people during the pandemic, but the uncertainty right now compared to what it was when we were inside of the office and we knew for sure this is happening, and we know we definitely have this plan. While we still have a plan that's very definite, we understand that things change a lot more now than we did last January. So that's where we've maybe kind of slowed down the process, even though we still have tons of work to do.
Adrian asked in the chat, do you have tips for deciphering company culture through the website? Because sometimes mission statements are a little bit ambiguous or nebulous. It sounds like there's a little bit of that X factor when you're evaluating if a candidate is a culture fit. So flip that around. How can they evaluate if your company culture is a good fit for them?
I never evaluate like a company that I'm applying to. I never really evaluate it just strictly from their own website. I usually use like a Glassdoor or some other like review site. I might look at them on social media to see what they're doing. I know my current company, like they put YouTube videos up of like field days that they were having or Christmas parties and stuff like that. So I kind of got a little bit more of a like a casual feel on different like social media platforms and like on their actual website, because their actual website was pretty ambiguous. And then looking at like Glassdoor and stuff, I take some of it with a grain of salt on the Glassdoor, because usually the people on Glassdoor, people are not that very happy in the first place. Or I'll look at like posts that they do on LinkedIn, things like that. But I usually don't look at just the company's website itself to decipher their culture.
I'm going to try to weave in a question from Karen with a question that was submitted ahead of the event. So how do you expect a candidate to be able to discuss a project with you that's been under NDA or that is under NDA? And what are you looking for when a candidate presents a project to you during an interview?
I can't ask too much about it, but I would think that really good storytelling skills, being able to explain first, like why the project started, like what was the problem, how did you address it, your thought process throughout the whole thing, and then what was the result, and then what was the impact on the business. I think that the story from beginning to end is really important. Just being very clear and concise about that. I don't really know about, NDA issues, so someone else can address that.
I normally suggest keeping the information generic. You don't actually have to talk about the product name. You don't have to talk about the company's problems or the real core issues at hand. I would keep it very generic. When you do present the visuals, wireframes or just a basic structure of what the idea is fine. Because really at least when I look at the portfolios for that type of information, I'm just looking at what your thought process was, like how you walked through it, how you solved it, what kind of research you did, who you communicated with, and what the outcome was. And most importantly, what were the lessons learned? What went wrong? What were the challenges? And what came out of that? How did you come above it? And what would you do differently next time? And so really, if the only project or projects you've worked on are all under NDA, then as long as, using the storytelling, UX storytelling, just telling that story in a high level way that's easily consumed by the person reading it, that's important. Because for example, I'm in construction software, and if I went to the details of job management, I'm not sure if I'd have to further explain all of that, and I would just keep it high level and just explain that in terms that is more consumable. Because most of the time, because we go through so many portfolios and resumes, you're skimming a lot of that. You just want the basics and the highlights and just get the general idea that this is a good candidate that I can dive into a little bit more. So if I'm skimming through it and it gives me the basics and tells me a compelling story and highlights of this general project that you're working on, then that would keep me intrigued without breaking the NDA.
Yeah, if all your work is under NDA and you can't share any of it, you're at a pretty serious disadvantage, since the other candidates will have portfolios and will have things for the hiring manager to assess. So I'm not going to encourage anyone to break an NDA. However, you should do things sensibly. So one option would be to upload something and password protect it. I don't particularly like that, because that gives the other person too much time to take screenshots or download or whatever. I'm personally comfortable with either sharing something on a Zoom call that is somewhat controlled, still not stopping them from taking a screenshot, but that would be pretty bold to do that during the interview, and that'd be a little bit weird. And the other would be, if you are doing an in-person interview, to print it out and share it and take it away with you. And then the one time I definitely wouldn't do it, and I just talked to one of my colleagues about this the other day, is if you are interviewing with a competitor. I would not show competitor screens from a prototype for a new product or something like that that your company is building. That's just unethical at that point. But don't put yourself at a serious disadvantage. Like Johnny said, you could anonymize your screens to some degree, reproduce them in some way, but you do have to show your capabilities if you're a designer. You've got to show your capabilities in some way.
I got a chance to work with a mentee last year who was kind of going through this, where her work was under NDA. And so what we worked on was having a case study for another product. And she was building out a dog adoption app. And we still put together the whole process of, you know, what's the UX process? You find personas, do a journey map. Okay, let's do that for this dog app. Put together some wireframes, put together some UI. So you can still say, hey, I work for this really big brand and you want to know my UX process, here it is spelled out. And you don't have to say that that's what that big brand does for their UX process, but at least when we see your portfolio, it shows some, you know, good designs, shows that you think about, you know, the persona, the whole process, and you've worked for some credible people too.
All right. Well, I do have several more questions on my list of questions, but we've already gone an hour, and I think that the real benefit here, not only learning from you guys, sharing your perspective, is going to be from everybody getting to actually practice answering questions. So that's why the second half of our event is actually mock interviews, and